Hey everybody, welcome to Frannie's Square and to part 2 of how to read a crochet pattern. We're also doing part 2 of our Lion Brand Crochet Cardigan crochet along. We're going to be starting the back of our sweater. So grab your hook, grab your yarn, and let's get started. Okay, so before we take a look at the pattern for the back, I just wanted to address sizing. So I've gotten a few questions on sizing. What size do I choose? And I had planned on keeping this very simple and doing a tutorial in the future on sizing and making alterations based on your measurements. So in that tutorial, we will go over measuring ourselves accurately and making adjustments where needed. I wanted to keep this tutorial fairly simple. I wanted to focus on reading the pattern. And one of the reasons I chose this pattern is because it's an open cardigan, you have more ease, it's a bigger stitch, which again produces more stretch, and so it gives us a lot of leeway. Still, you need to know how to choose your size. Now, if you're going to be using actual body measurements to choose the size of the garment you're making, keep in mind that the measurements in the pattern are finished measurements. What does that mean? It means that the measurements you see in the pattern are the finished measurements of the garment itself, not of your body. So for example, the small has a chest measurement of 36 inches. My actual chest measurement is a little bit shy of 35 inches. So I know I have some extra space in there. Plus the cardigan opens in the front and the stitch is a little bit larger, so I know I'm gonna have some stretch. So I know I'm gonna have plenty of room in there for my chest. So just take that into consideration if you're using your body measurements to choose the size. Rhonda Priest, one of our subscribers, gave an excellent suggestion. Grab one of your favorite cardigans out of your closet and we're going to measure a cardigan. I'm going to measure mine here and show you how I do it. Okay, so go grab your favorite cardigan if you want to do your sizing that way, and we're going to get started with choosing our size. Okay, so before we start measuring our sweater, let's just talk about body parts, where they fall, and how they compare to the pattern. Now, I know you're probably thinking, I know where my body parts are. Yes, but we want to see where they are on the pattern so that we know we're measuring the right thing when we measure our sweater. So first, pull out your schematic of the cardigan, and this is the back of the cardigan. And let's just take a look at this. The first thing you notice is it's very rectangular. You don't see any tapering happening. So this is your armhole right here. And then everything else below it is just a rectangle. So what that means is, if you look at the armholes of my shirt here, everything from my chest and below is basically going to be a rectangle. So when I want to know the chest measurement, I know that this measurement here is my chest, which is this measurement along the bottom. So for the small, I'll just talk about the small, but you can follow along in any size. For the small, that's 18 inches. Now, the finished measurement on the pattern for the chest is 36 inches, which is just double this because you have a back and a front. Now, in the case of this cardigan, you don't have one front, you have two front panels. You have a left front and a right front. And you would expect, if it's 18 for the front and 18 for the back, that each panel would be 9 inches. But if you look at the schematic here, for the small, it's 13.5 inches. So what's going on there? So if you go back to your picture, take a look at your cardigan, you see you have a collar that folds over. And actually the sweater that I chose to measure has that as well. So it folds over, that's going to take up some space. And then you'll also have some ease. Now, if you don't know what ease is, I promise I'm going to be going into detail about all of these terms in a future tutorial. But just think of ease in this case as the amount of space between your body and the garment itself. So between your actual measurements and the measurements of the garment. And with a cardigan, especially a cardigan like this, it's not so tight fitting. We want it to have some ease so we can move around in it nice and easily. Okay, so let's go back to our back here. All right, so we're going to measure right under the armpits on my cardigan that I have here. And I'm doing that because I don't know if there was any tapering. I don't think there was in this sweater. I didn't look at it that closely, but we'll look at it together. Then this is the length of your armhole. So if you look at my shirt here, that is this length here. And that's important because we want our arm to fit in our armhole and have some room to move around. So we'll measure that as well. The measurement across the top here is your shoulder measurement. So you notice it goes from the inside of the armhole to the inside of the other armhole. And for a small, it's 15 inches. So that's going to be the measurement from here to here on the sweater. You can also take these measurements on your body if you like. I recommend using a tape measure because a tape measure will go nicely around your curves. Okay, and then the last measurement is the length of the cardigan, and that's broken up into two pieces on this side because you have your armhole depth and then you have the rest of the length, and then it's also in one measurement along here. So those are the basic measurements we're going to look at when looking at our sweater to make sure that we're choosing the right size. Now let me show you the sweater that I chose. This is one of my favorite sweaters, and it's from Soft Surroundings. I'll put it on for you just to give you an idea of how it fits. And I thought this would be a good one to choose because this is the type of fit I'm hoping to get with this cardigan we're making. So you can see it has the folded over collar like the one we're making, and it's a pretty simple sweater, but I love it and I love the fit of it. So hopefully I can mimic that in the sweater that we're making. All right, so take your sweater over to a table where you can lay it flat and we'll start measuring. Okay, so I hope this isn't too difficult to see. It's kind of hard with my camera setup, but I'm going to try to show you what I'm doing. Okay, so this is the back of my sweater. I'm just going to get the collar out of the way, and I'm going to look for the seams on the side and just fold the front part underneath as flat as I can. I have a belt on this one, so that's a little difficult, but just along the seam so that I can get the actual measurement of the back on both sides. Fold over the seam. I'm actually going to pull this collar out. It's too thick. It's causing all kinds of stuff to happen under there. Okay, so there we go, along the seam. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to measure right under the armpits for my chest measurement. So from here to here. Now if you have a straight ruler, that's great. I actually like a straight ruler better for measuring garments, but I don't have one up here, so I'm just going to grab my tape measure. Okay, trying to keep this as flat as possible. I'm going to go from one side to the other, and I'm going to say it's less than 18 inches if I'm going seam to seam, probably more like 17.5 inches for me. Okay, so that will be my chest measurement. So making the small I think is good for me with the 18-inch back because it'll give me some ease. I'll be able to wear a shirt underneath it, which I probably will if it's fall, so you want to think about those things as well. Okay, now we're going to measure our armhole depth. Okay, so for the armhole depth, you don't want to follow the curve like this and measure. You want to measure straight up and down. Okay, so straight up and down from the seam that is my shoulder seam, from the seam that's my shoulder seam, down to my armpit. I'm just going to do a straight measurement there, and I get about 8 inches. That seems about right. 8 inches. And I'm in luck because the armhole for the small is 8 inches, so that seems to be pretty good as well. Okay, so now let's take a look at the shoulder measurement. In the pattern, my shoulder goes from the inside of the armhole from one side to the other. And for the size small, it's 15 inches. So let's take a look at my sweater. Here, let's see if we can see the... There we go. All right, it's kind of hard to not have my sweater slip off the table here. Let's see if I can do this. All right, so what I'm going to do to measure my sweater, let me try turning that around. Maybe that's the key. All right, that was a better idea. Okay, so now this is the top of my sweater we're looking at. And here is the seam starting my armhole here on this side and on this side. Okay, so I'm going to just take my tape measure. From seam to seam, it looks like it's about 14 inches. So, like I said, my pattern says 15 inches. So, I think I'm going to have some nice room in this cardigan. I'm not concerned. I think that the size small is going to be perfect for me. Now, the last thing that I'm going to measure here is the length from the bottom of the armpit to the bottom of the sweater. I'm just curious to see how this compares to the schematic. I'm not so concerned. I don't mind a shorter or a longer sweater. And if you look at this sweater, it does look like it has some tapering here. But I'm just going to go straight down from the armpit to the bottom is almost 17 inches. Now on the schematic it's 18 inches, so this is actually shorter than the sweater we're making. So I'm happy with that. I like a longer cardigan, so that'll be nice. Now if you're just curious and you want to know about the front flaps, you can also take the front flap of your cardigan here, and you can see that this cardigan has more curves rather than being so rectangular. But if I want to go take the front flap from my seam, and if I go straight across from the seam, let me do it along the bottom so it's a little bit straighter. From the seam to the edge is 13.5 inches, which is exactly what my front flap is for my pattern. So I'm feeling pretty confident in the small. I'm going to stick with that size for myself, and hopefully this helped you pick your size for your pattern. Okay, so now back to our pattern. At this point, you've done your swatching. You know which yarn you're going to use. You know which size hook you're going to use. You've also learned the stitch pattern, so this is going to be very easy. And you know what size you're going to make your sweater. And as I said before, just go through and highlight the correct number for your size so you don't get confused. Okay, so we have a few notes before we start the back, and the notes are that the cardigan is made in 5 pieces, a back, 2 fronts, and 2 sleeves, and we saw that in the schematics. A collar extension is worked as part of each front. The ends of the extensions are sewn together to make the collar, and we'll go over what that means when we're doing the front. And then for those who find it visual helpful, we've included a stitch diagram, which we went over in part 1 of this tutorial. And your stitch diagram is right here. You can keep that out if you find it helpful. I think this stitch is so easy, you're not even going to need to refer to it. Okay, so now we go to the back. And this part here is going to be, let's see, this part of your sweater, up to your armhole, okay? So we're going to start at the bottom and work our way up till we get to the armholes, and then we will shape the armholes after. So let's just start with the bottom of the back. Okay, if you are making the small size, you're going to chain 78, medium you're going to chain 90, large 96, 1x 108, 2x 114. So let's start by chaining. Now I've already started my back, so I'm going to just do a small number of chains just to demonstrate what to do. Okay, so I've chained a multiple of 3 plus 6 because I know my first V-stitch starts in the 6th chain from the hook. All right, so our instructions say begin with row 1 of the pattern, which is this. Here we have row 1. Work in V-stitch pattern for a total of, for a small and a medium, we're going to do 45 rows. For a large and 1x, 47 rows, and for a 2x, 49 rows. So that'll just determine the length from your armpit to the bottom of the back of your sweater. And if you are making a small, you will have 24 V-stitches at the end. So we'll count our V-stitches at the end of the row and make sure we have the right number. If you have a medium, you'll have 28 V-stitches, large 30, 1x 34, 2x 36. And then you'll have 1 double crochet at the end of each row. Once you're done that, you're going to fasten off. So first we take our chain, okay, and we're going to start our first V-stitch in the 6th chain from the hook, just like we did in our swatch. And remember, the instructions say begin with row 1 of pattern, so we go up here. V-stitch in the 6th chain from the hook. Then after that, we're going to skip the next 2 chains and V-stitch in the next chain. And we're going to just keep repeating that till we get to 3 chains from the end, and then we're going to skip 2 chains and double crochet in the last chain. So the same thing we did on our swatch is what we're going to be doing for the bottom of our sweater. Okay, so going into the 6th chain from the hook, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm going to make a V-stitch, which is a double crochet, chain 1, and double crochet. Okay, just like that. If you're wondering about my hook, I just went on a crochet hooks shopping spree and I did a review of them, so you can go take a look at that. Okay, next we're going to skip 2 chains and we're going to do a V-stitch into the 3rd. So again, double crochet, chain 1, and double crochet. It's our second V-stitch. And you're going to do that, skip 2 again and do it again until you get to 3 chains from the end. I love how projects start out with just a piece of yarn and then they start turning into something. Skip 2, another V-stitch. Just going to keep doing that all the way along. And then I will meet you 3 chains before the end. Okay, so when you get to your last 3 chains, you're going to skip 2 of them, and in the very last chain, you're going to do a double crochet. And that's the end of row 1. Now, the one thing you want to make sure is that you have the right number of V-stitches. And it told us in the pattern, for whichever size we're making, how many V-stitches across we should have. So I'm making the small. Here is my started piece. So I can just count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24 V-stitches. So I have the right number of V-stitches. Once you have your base correct, you're golden for this pattern because you're just going to be putting your next V-stitch in the top of your previous V-stitches. They'll all line up and it should be very easy. Now, we go back to the pattern. For row 2 and every row thereafter, We're going to chain 3 and turn. So we're going to chain 3 and turn. Turn your work. Then we're going to V-stitch in the chain 1 space of each V-stitch across, and then double crochet in the top of the beginning chain at the end. So for every single V-stitch, so here's my first V-stitch, here's the double crochet, the chain 1, the double crochet. So the chain 1 space is the space in between there. I'm going to do a V-stitch right into that. Double crochet, chain 1, and double crochet. So you'll have your V-stitches sitting right on top of each other. Then I'll go over to my next V, not this, that's not a V. So I have my first V, here's my second V, and I'm going to do the V-stitch right into that space, and I'm going to do that all the way to the end, and at the very end I'm going to do a double crochet into the beginning chain. So keep going and I'll meet you across there at the last stitch. Okay, so now we've gotten to the end. I just did my V-stitch in my last V here, and I'm going to double crochet in the top of my beginning chain, which was a 3 chain, 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to double crochet into the top of that. Okay, and there you go. So now all we do is keep repeating row 2. So we'll chain 3 again, turn, chain 3 again, 1, 2, 3, oops, and turn our work, and we'll start working a V-stitch into the chain space of every V-stitch across. All right, so continue that for the number of rows you need, and then I will meet you back here to shape the armhole. Okay, so I have completed my 45 rows here. So I look at the pattern, see what we're going to do next. And it says, fasten off. And it says once I'm finished my rows here, I'm going to fasten off. All right, so I'm going to fasten off. I don't know if you noticed, but I'm using my new scissors from the Tulip Kit. Very nice. They cut beautifully. Okay, and I will weave in that end. Okay, so I've woven in my end. Hopefully you have too. And now let's take a look at the next part of the pattern. So the next part of the pattern is to shape the armholes. So let's just look at our picture, make sure we know what it's supposed to look like when we're done. So we can see here we're going to decrease the number of stitches in some way and then work up from there. And it looks like it's just decreased in one row so that we're not doing a gradual decrease. Let's take a look at what the pattern says. Okay, so looking at our pattern here, row 1, WS, that's wrong side. So we're going to be working from the wrong side of our piece. Now, how do we know the wrong side? Well, if we started with chains as our foundation, then when your tail is on the left side of your garment, you're looking at the right side of it. Another way to tell, when you're looking from the right side, you're going to see both the back and front loops of your stitch. So you see how I can see? Let me see if I can. So you see how I can see both the back and front loop when it's facing me this way? But if I go to the wrong side, you'll see I can only see that back part of the loop because the front part is lower and it's on the other side. So that's two ways to tell. So we're going to start working on the wrong side, which is going to mean I'm going to want the side where I can't see both loops from this side, or the side where my tail is on the right. I usually leave that tail on. It's an easy way for me to make sure I'm working on the side that I'm supposed to be working on. Okay, so this is the wrong side of my work. Okay, so I'm going to make a slip knot here. All right, and it says, draw up a loop in second double crochet of second V-stitch. For me, it's second. If you're making a medium, it's third, large fourth, 1x fifth, 2x sixth. So make sure you're doing it in the correct V-stitch, the second double crochet of that stitch. So again, for me, it's the second. So let's go take a look here. I'm looking at my work, and here is my first V-stitch, and here is my second. And I'm going to pull up a loop in the, not the first double crochet of that V, but the second one. So I'm going to pull up a loop there. Okay. Make sure you're doing it in the right V-stitch for your size. And then it says chain 3, which counts as a double crochet, and then V-stitch in chain 1 space of each V-stitch to the last, and for me it's 2 V-stitches, medium 3, large 4, 1x5, 2x6. So make sure you're picking the right number here, and I'll show you how I do it for my size. So now my chain 3 counted as my first double crochet. Okay, so let's get that chain 3 in. So my chain 3 counts as my first double crochet. So that's chain 3, 1, 2, 3, and that's in this second double crochet of this V-stitch. And now I'm going to just go across to every V-stitch after this and make a V-stitch in the chain 1 space. And I am going to, and the instructions say I go over until the last 2 V-stitches, and then I'm going to make my last double crochet. Again, make sure you're using the correct number for your size. Now I'm going to do this all the way across and show you, and what I wanted to show you was the end part of this. It says, I'm going to go all the way across until I get to the last 2 V-stitches, and that's for my size. Then I'm going to double crochet in the first double crochet of the next V-stitch and leave the remaining stitches unworked, and then I should have 20 V-stitches across. And that makes sense because I'm skipping the first 2 V-stitches here and just starting my double crochet at the end of that second V-stitch, but my first V-stitch I make is in the next V-stitch. So I missed 2 on this end, and then I'm going to go until I have 2 left, on this end, which will be this V and this V, and I'm just going to put a double crochet in the first double crochet of this V, leaving 2 V's unworked. So I had 24 across. Now I'm going to be missing 2 on each side, so that'll leave me with 20 V-stitches across. Then what I'm going to be doing is begin with row 2 of the pattern. We don't need row 1 because we already have V-stitches below to work into. So we're going to begin with row 2 of the pattern, which means we're only going to work row 2 over and over again. And I'm going to work in the V-stitch pattern for a total of 20 rows. If you're doing a medium, 22, a large, 22, a 1x or 2x, you're going to do 24 rows. And these rows here represent this rectangle here of your back. Okay? So I'm going to meet you at the last 2 V's of this row and show you how I finish the row off. And then after that, we'll do the rest of these rows and our back will be done. Okay, so I've gotten to the end of this row and I have 2 V-stitches left, as you can see here. Okay, so I V-stitched in the chain 1 space of each V-stitch to the last 2 V-stitches. Now I'm going to double crochet in the first double crochet of the next V-stitch. So My next V-stitch is right here, and I'm just going to double crochet into this first double crochet. So I'm just going to go into that stitch there under both loops and double crochet just like that. And now we're off and running because we're going to continue working row 2 for the number of rows it tells you for your size. So for me, it's 20 rows, and we know that row 2 and we know that for row 2 we chain 3, turn, and then do our V-stitches across, then double crochet in the top of the beginning chain and continue on, just like we were doing for the bottom half of this. But now we won't be working the number of V-stitches on each side that it told us not to work. So continue doing that, and I will meet you at the end of the rows that you need to get done. Okay, so I have now finished my back piece. You can see here where my armpits went in and up. Check your measurements, make sure that your measurements match, and they should if your swatch was correct and met the gauge. Okay, so that's the back piece. Finish that up, and then in the next part we'll begin the front of our sweater. Okay, so that's how we make the back piece of our cardigan. So continue on, finish that up. Hopefully you're starting to feel more comfortable about reading a pattern. And if you have any questions as you're working along, please feel free to leave a comment for me or to send me an email at my email address, franniesquare@gmail.com. In the next tutorial, we'll begin working on the front pieces of our cardigan. As always, thank you so much for joining me. I truly appreciate it. Remember to make it your own, and I'll see you soon.